All right, so in the last video, I'm going to talk about the findings, conclusion, come back to the introduction, and then the reference list. So a lot of really important sections of the paper. First of all, the findings are the interesting part, and you should focus your efforts here. So this section is going to be about 3 to 6 pages. I would lean past that 3 pages as much as you can. But you know what? I also recognize that we are really living in limited times here, and you might write every single detail that you can and still have only 3 pages. So the first section of your findings should be detailed description, although I'll give another idea for how to organize this too. So you should give a detailed description of the physical setting, which by that I mean for this, whatever virtual observations you used. So maybe there's photos on the website, maybe you can glean information from Google Maps videos. I talked about putting that in your method section. Maybe you can see part of the whatever the congregation looks like on the inside when you're watching the virtual service, or maybe they're not recording from their regular podium. I don't know. So just describe what you see and describe what you've seen on the website. You might include information here from your email with the congregation member or leader if you were able to have that conversation. So in your description, you can talk about how you emailed with them, what you asked, what they said. What does that help you learn about in kind of the description of this congregation. I would say, try to include as much rich description as possible, bringing the reader along with you in your experience. Even if you want to talk about, like, when I went to the virtual service, I logged in I not logged in, but like I accessed the website at such and such time, and luckily I was just wearing my pajamas, whereas if I had gone here in person, I would have had to wear slacks and a blouse or something like that. So you can add as much of that in as possible. The second part of your findings section should be making connections. Now, I'll say later too, you might want to weave these things in instead of having 2 separate sections. Either way is fine, just as long as they're both there. So you want to make connections between what you observed and our course material. And this is going to be our analysis. So it's not just describing things. Anyone can describe things, right? We want to bring in that sociological perspective. So I would say you want to aim to make at least 3 distinct connections. So don't say, like, there was this ritual and this ritual and this ritual. Well, you're talking about rituals. Like, what else? Obviously, this is going to be really limiting. You're not going to see, probably, unless your church or congregation has some sort of a Zoom meeting, which I know some places are doing. You might not see any interactions. And you don't know, like, the original questions asked, do you see groups of people sitting together? What races, what genders? I don't see any of that in terms of the congregants, so you can't report that. But whatever you can connect to in the readings that we've done, any of the readings you can connect to, you should try to do that in at least 3 different things. So here's an example of how you might say that. In observing, so maybe it's a prayer. In observing the prayer by the priest, I thought about the reading on maybe rituals, and how, or I thought about Johnstone's initial Unit 1 readings and how he talked about rituals as being such and such. This connects to my observation because so this is really, think about it as connecting the dots. You don't just want to throw an observation out there and throw a term out there. You want to connect the dots for the reader, in part because, you are the writer of the paper. You need to make those connections. But then I don't know, as the person grading your work, I don't know if you know what those connections are if you don't make them. You need to make that explicit for me. Do you know that this is a ritual? Do you know where we learned about rituals? Make those connections. So like I said earlier, alternatively, your analysis might be woven throughout your description. So maybe it makes more sense for you as you describe something in detail, and then you want to make that connection, and then you describe this thing. So maybe then your findings section is going to have maybe 3 subsections where you talk about the ritual of prayer, or, and stuff like that. Whatever makes most sense to you. All right, your conclusion then. So then I would encourage you to work on your conclusion after you've written your findings. It should be about 1 to 2 pages long. You should conclude with your most significant takeaways. So here's the part where you can add in just a tiny bit of, yourself into the paper. You might talk about how the service made you feel. You might talk about, how it made you, what was interesting to you, what was maybe not interesting, but what are your significant, takeaways from that virtual visit? Are there questions that remain, particularly sociological questions? I would encourage you to not just list a litany of questions that have to do with, like, why are people religious? We kind of try to cover that this semester. And then really try to conclude with this idea. What does it mean to examine religion and this particular congregation with a sociological lens? So if you haven't already, this should really connect to the Unit 1 material. And so even if you do include some personal ideas in the conclusion, should bring it back to sociology. What are we learning here? Then move to your introduction. I always advise you to write your introduction last, because if you're supposed to introduce your paper in your introduction, how can you do that when you don't have a paper yet? So now that you've written your whole paper, come back to your introduction. It should be about 1 to 2 pages long, and you should describe your religious congregation and why you chose it. You should not include any in-depth personal information. You might explain why you chose it, that it was interesting to you, that it was convenient for you, that you anticipated, learning something interesting, but not, this paper is more formal than your first, your essay, your proposal essay. I said you could be creative and informal. This is the kind of edited version of that. If you want to have like a superstar introduction, you might include a roadmap. I'm not requiring that here, but a good introduction in a sociology, like in the articles we read, it gives you a roadmap of, I'm going to talk about this and this and this, and my general findings are this. It kind of is a whole synopsis of the paper. It's not a mystery novel, it's a sociology paper. Then finally, you'll come to the reference page. So this should be on a separate page at the end of your paper. Don't hit enter a whole bunch of times. Insert a page break. Then you should list your references in alphabetical order, and Word will do that for you, and they should also be hanging. And so there's information on how to do that. It should be double spaced without extra extra spaces. Again, keep in mind, I know citing websites can be really confusing. Do your best. Probably a lot of the websites don't have authors, so you want to list like the organization first and then the year, if there's a year on the website. If there's no year, N period, D period means no date. Again, just do your best here. And be consistent with your citations. So that is all that I have for you. Again, all of this information is in the assignment sheet, and reach out as you have questions about this, and as you work on your papers. Just do little by little and work and do your best.